What if one man could outsmart the FBI, and another could slip inside the Pentagon from his bedroom? No weapons, no violence, just a screen, a modem, and the will to break through the world's most secure digital walls. 2 names, 2 missions, 1 question: who really holds the power, the system, or the ones who know how to break it? This story doesn't begin in a dark alley or a locked basement. It begins in front of a screen, under the glow of code and silence. 2 men from opposite sides of the Atlantic, both ordinary on the surface, both capable of shaking the world's most powerful governments without leaving their homes. Kevin Mitnick, born in California in 1963, was once the most wanted computer criminal in the United States. He wasn't after money, he wasn't a spy. What he wanted was control over systems, networks, and the people who trusted them. By his early 20s, he had already penetrated the networks of Pacific Bell, Motorola, Sun Microsystems, and even the U.S. National Security Agency. The FBI called him the most elusive computer criminal in history. Meanwhile, in North London, Gary McKinnon, born in 1966 in Glasgow, was not interested in trade secrets or government surveillance. His obsession was different: UFOs. Between 2001 and 2002, McKinnon accessed 97 U.S. military and NASA computers, searching for classified information about extraterrestrial life and free energy technology he believed the U.S. government was hiding from the public. Their methods couldn't have been more different. Mitnick was a master manipulator, not just of machines, but of people. He used social engineering, posing as employees, tricking staff into giving him credentials. McKinnon, in contrast, used free software, weak passwords, and unguarded entry points. He acted alone, at night, through a dial-up connection from his girlfriend's aunt's house. Still, both exposed something that terrified authorities: how fragile digital infrastructure really is. By the time they were caught, Mitnick had cost companies millions of dollars and forced the government to reassess national cybersecurity. McKinnon, though less technically skilled, triggered international legal battles, political debates, and a diplomatic standoff between the UK and the US. This isn't just a story about hackers. It's a story about power, control, and the invisible lines we draw around what's secure, and who gets to cross them. Kevin Mitnick didn't break into systems. He walked into them. Not by force, but by invitation, often without the victim realizing it. His weapon of choice wasn't a virus or a brute force attack. It was trust. Mitnick mastered the art of social engineering, manipulating people into giving up passwords, access codes, or confidential information. He understood that humans are often the weakest link in any security system, and he exploited that weakness with precision. One former telecom employee recalled how Mitnick, impersonating a colleague, convinced him to reset an internal password. By the time the company realized what had happened, Mitnick had already cloned entire systems and disappeared. Technically, Mitnick was just as capable. He bypassed firewalls, copied proprietary software, and monitored internal communications. But what made him dangerous wasn't just his skill, it was his control. He rarely left traces, he didn't destroy data or seek fame. Instead, he stayed invisible, collecting access like trophies. His hacks weren't chaotic, they were calculated, like moves on a chessboard. Gary McKinnon, on the other hand, wasn't after control. He was searching for truth. Convinced that the US government was hiding proof of alien technology and sustainable energy, McKinnon began scanning US military networks from his home in the UK. He used basic tools, a program called Remotely Anywhere, easily downloadable at the time, to access systems with blank administrator passwords. According to US prosecutors, he caused the shutdown of over 2,000 computers across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and NASA, even disabling critical systems at a U.S. Navy weapons station for 24 hours. But McKinnon's technique was clumsy. He made little effort to hide his identity. He left behind messages mocking U.S. security, calling it crap, and warning of a global conspiracy. His behavior was more driven by obsession than strategy. Psychological evaluations later described him as suffering from Asperger's syndrome, which may have contributed to his hyper-focus on the UFO theory and his lack of understanding about the legal consequences of his actions. While Mitnick approached hacking like a game of strategy, McKinnon treated it like a mission. Mitnick wanted to test limits. McKinnon wanted to expose secrets. One was guided by technical mastery and detachment, the other by fixation and belief. Their motives diverged completely. Mitnick's hacks were rooted in intellectual curiosity and the thrill of beating the system. He often denied causing damage, claiming he never profited or sold stolen data. McKinnon, meanwhile, admitted his intrusion, proudly, and framed it as a form of digital civil disobedience. He wasn't just looking for files, he was trying to prove that the public was being lied to. This contrast, control versus chaos, strategy versus obsession, shaped not only their crimes, but the way the world would respond to them. In the next section, we'll examine how authorities measured the threat each man posed, the damage they caused, and how both forced governments to change the way they think about cybercrime. In the eyes of law enforcement, danger isn't always about destruction. It's about access, who has it, how they got it, and what they could have done with it. This is where Kevin Mitnick and Gary McKinnon, though vastly different in style and motive, both triggered deep anxiety across the security community. Each revealed that a single individual, working alone, could bypass multi-million-dollar defense systems, not with weapons, but with time, patience, and a keyboard. Kevin Mitnick's intrusions had clear, measurable costs. According to U.S. authorities, he caused more than $10 million in damages to companies like Motorola, Nokia, and Sun Microsystems. These weren't theoretical losses. Mitnick accessed source code, development environments, and confidential business strategies. For companies building products that took years to design and millions to secure, his presence inside their systems was a direct threat to their competitive survival. His case became so serious that after his arrest in 1995, the prosecution insisted that he not be allowed access to any phone, not even a landline, fearing he could launch attacks by whistling into the receiver. Whether that was paranoia or prudence, it showed how deeply he had unnerved the system. Gary McKinnon, by contrast, left a different kind of trail, one harder to quantify, but equally disturbing. Though he didn't steal data or destroy networks, the fact that he accessed 97 military and NASA computers without detection sent a chilling message. If someone with no formal training could do that from a slow dial-up connection, what could a hostile government or organized cybercriminal group achieve? The U.S. government claimed his actions resulted in over $700,000 in damages, mostly from system outages and the cost of repairing vulnerabilities. More important than the money, however, was the realization that critical defense infrastructure had been left unguarded, exposed not by a spy ring, but by a man looking for flying saucers. What distinguished Mitnick in the eyes of professionals was his consistency. He breached system after system with surgical precision, rarely repeating mistakes, always adapting. To cybersecurity analysts, he was a blueprint for how one person could weaponize knowledge and social insight. McKinnon, on the other hand, embodied the threat of unpredictability, the user outside the system, driven not by greed or warfare, but by belief, and sometimes belief is harder to anticipate than intent. Experts in cybercrime have long debated which type of threat is more dangerous. A technically gifted infiltrator like Mitnick can cause massive damage under the radar, and do it again. But someone like McKinnon exposes the system's softest underbelly, not firewalls, but complacency. Both attackers forced governments to act. After Mitnick's case, companies invested heavily in staff training and internal security audits. After McKinnon, military networks adopted stricter password policies and began re-evaluating remote access procedures. The difference ultimately was in the response. Mitnick was prosecuted, imprisoned, and later transformed into a cybersecurity consultant, someone who now helped companies protect themselves from threats like his younger self. McKinnon, facing extradition, became a symbol of public resistance. Human rights groups argued he was being punished more for embarrassing the US than for the actual damage he caused. In 2012, after a decade of legal battles, the UK blocked his extradition on health grounds, citing his diagnosed autism and high suicide risk. What began as two isolated acts of digital trespass ended as two global incidents, one shaped by skill and subtlety, the other by belief and backlash, and in both cases, the institutions they targeted were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the walls they thought were secure had invisible doors, and anyone determined enough could find a way through. In the final part, we'll return to the bigger picture, what these two figures reveal about the world we've built, and the fragile lines between curiosity, obsession, and crime. Kevin Mitnick and Gary McKinnon never physically touched a weapon, never stepped inside a secure government facility, and never laid hands on $1 of stolen money. Yet both forced governments, corporations, and entire security industries to re-evaluate what danger looks like in the digital age. Their stories weren't about bombs or bullets. They were about access, intent, and how fragile even the most fortified systems can be when the attacker understands how to slip between the cracks. Mitnick's legacy is one of cold efficiency. He didn't act out of anger or ideology. He wasn't trying to change the world. He wanted access because it was there, because he could take it, and because no one could stop him. His actions were quiet, targeted, and difficult to detect. And for years, no one did. That's what made him so dangerous. He didn't trigger alarms because he knew how not to. When he finally was caught, it wasn't a software bug or firewall that betrayed him. It was another expert, someone who had to think like him to catch him. In the years since, Mitnick transformed himself into a security consultant, offering companies the very insight he once used against them. In a strange way, he became proof that some forms of expertise, even when misused, still hold value if turned toward the right cause. McKinnon's path was less precise and far more personal. He didn't have the technical depth of Mitnick, nor the subtlety. What he had was an unwavering belief that he was uncovering something the world needed to know. His intrusions were messy, traceable, and openly declared. He left behind messages, not hidden footprints. He wanted to be heard. But in that act of trying to expose what he thought was a cover-up, he stepped into a legal and diplomatic firestorm. For years, his case symbolized the struggle between national security and personal rights. Was he a hacker or a whistleblower, a threat or a warning sign? Both men stood on opposite ends of the hacking spectrum, one methodical and elusive, the other obsessive and transparent. Yet the impact of their actions exposed a common truth, that our systems, military, corporate, governmental, are often less secure than we assume. More importantly, they showed that the motivation behind a digital breach is as vital to understand as the breach itself. One man hacked to challenge the system, the other to reveal a truth he believed was hidden, and in doing so, They forced everyone else to look more closely at what we protect, how we protect it, and why those protections fail. Their stories also remind us that not all threats come from criminals with clear intentions. Sometimes they come from those who simply believe they're doing the right thing, or just doing what they can. In the end, the difference between a criminal, a whistleblower, or a misguided idealist isn't always obvious at the time. It's only clear in hindsight, after the damage is done and the systems have been rebuilt. So perhaps the real question isn't who was more dangerous, Mitnick or McKinnon, but rather what kind of system allows both to succeed. Because in the world they operated in, curiosity alone was enough to open locked doors. And if that doesn't keep us up at night, maybe it should. In the end, Kevin Mitnick and Gary McKinnon didn't just hack into systems. They hacked into our assumptions about security, about control, about what makes someone a threat. One acted with calculated silence, the other with unapologetic belief. But both left a legacy that governments are still dealing with today. So, who do you think was the greater threat? The one who could vanish inside the machine, or the one who stood outside and shouted what he thought was the truth? Let us know what you think in the comments. Do you see hackers like these as criminals, rebels, or necessary wake-up calls? If you found this story gripping, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We've got more untold stories of the digital underworld coming soon.